The sonar operator didn't believe what he was seeing. He tapped the screen twice, then checked the calibration logs. Everything read normal. The contact moving toward Trident from the Mariana Trench was approximately 400 feet long and rising at a steady 12 knots. "Sir, we have an anomaly." The shift supervisor crossed the cramped monitoring station in 3 steps. His coffee sloshed over the rim. He looked at the screen, then at the operator, then back at the screen. "Run diagnostics." Already did. Twice. The contact continued its ascent. On the display, it looked like a continent had learned to swim. "Get me Vought. Now." 18 miles away, in the submerged section of Trident Black Site, Dr. Sarah Chen stared at readouts that made no sense. The siren array had gone active on its own 40 minutes ago. Not a scheduled test. Not a manual activation. The bioacoustic emitters were cycling through frequencies that shouldn't exist in the current programming. She pulled up the source code. Someone had uploaded new parameters. The timestamp read 3 a.m., but she'd been asleep at 3 a.m. She scrolled through the frequency patterns, and her stomach dropped. This wasn't the standard deterrent sequence they used for crowd control. This was an alpha call, a distress beacon mixed with what the old Monarch files called a challenge response. The files Vought wasn't supposed to have. "Chen, we've got a problem in Reactor 3. She turned. Marcus, one of the junior engineers, stood in the doorway with a tablet. His face had gone the particular shade of gray that meant radiation alarms. "How bad?" "Containment's holding, but we're venting coolant. The isotope storage temperature spiked 20 minutes ago." 20 minutes. Right when Siren activated. "Shut it down. All of it. Siren, reactor feed, everything." "I tried. Systems locked. Override codes aren't working." Chen pushed past him and ran for the control room. Behind her, through the reinforced windows that looked out into the Pacific darkness, something changed in the water. The permanent research lights that illuminated the facility's exterior suddenly seemed dimmer. Not because they'd failed, but because something massive had moved between them and the monitoring station. In the command center, alarms screamed across every board. The Vought crisis manager on duty, a man named Kellerman, who'd handled 3 soup incidents and 1 congressional investigation without breaking a sweat, stared at the incoming data with the expression of someone watching his career end in real time. "Tell me that's a glitch." "It's not a glitch," Chen said. "Then tell me what the hell it is." She pulled up the sonar feed. The contact was 4 miles out now, 3.5. The water displacement signature matched nothing in any naval database. It matched something else entirely. Something from files that were supposed to be buried under 6 levels of classification and a congressional kill order. "We need to evacuate, right now." Kellerman's hand hovered over the emergency broadcast system. "Do you know what an evacuation order does to our timeline? Senator Newman's committee meets in 6 days. We promised them operational status. I don't care about the committee. Vought cares. The DOD cares. Do you have any idea how much money is in this facility?" The lights flickered. Not the regular fluorescent panels, but the deep water floods that kept the Pacific at bay. One of them exploded in a shower of sparks and pressure-shocked glass. Then another. Something was rising beneath them. Chen grabbed the emergency radio. "All personnel, this is Dr. Chen. Begin evacuation protocol Epsilon. This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a..." Kellerman ripped the radio from her hand. "Belay that order. We are not evacuating based on a sensor anomaly." "That's not an anomaly." "Then what is it?" The question hung in the recycled air. On every screen, the contact had stopped moving. It sat 1 mile from Trident's outer perimeter, perfectly still, as if considering something. The sonar painted it in layers of fan hui data that suggested density mass and something else. Something that radiated outward in waves that made no sense to conventional physics. In the reactor chamber, the temperature gauge hit critical. Alarms shrieked. Automated systems tried to dump coolant and failed. The isotope storage containers filled with enough enriched material to power a small city or build a very dirty bomb began to leak. The smell hit the ventilation system 6 seconds later. Ozone and metal and something older, something that had no name in any contemporary language. On the sonar display, the contact moved again. Not toward Trident. Not away. Up. The water displacement signature changed as it rose. What had been swimming was now standing. The sonar lost definition as the target breached into shallower depths where the acoustic profile scattered against thermal layers and current variations. Chen didn't need sonar anymore. She could see it through the observation dome. At first it looked like the ocean had developed a ridge. Then the ridge moved. Then it kept moving, rising higher than the facility's tallest tower. Higher than the drilling platform, higher than anything built by human hands had any right to reach. Dorsal plates caught the moonlight. Each one was the size of a billboard, serrated and ancient, glowing with a blue luminescence that came from somewhere deep inside, somewhere that had nothing to do with electricity or chemistry or any science Vaught's black budget could buy. Kellerman finally reached for the evacuation alarm. He was 43 seconds too late. The ocean didn't roar. It simply moved aside, displaced by a presence that had been old when humanity was learning to make fire. The creature's eyes opened, reflecting the facility lights with the disinterest of a natural law observing a temporary condition. It took one step forward. Trident's outer sensors shattered from the pressure wave alone. The crisis room at Vought Tower didn't panic. Panic was for people who hadn't spent 6 years managing superhero catastrophes. Ashley Barrett, Senior Vice President of Hero Management, stood at the head of the conference table and watched 3 screens simultaneously. One showed Trident burning. One showed stock futures. One showed a CNN anchor struggling to describe what witnesses were calling a geological event with teeth. Options, she said. The room held 12 people. Marketing, legal, media relations, crisis response, and one liaison from the Department of Defense, who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. Nobody spoke for 3 seconds. "We cut the feed," said Marcus from digital media. "Blame technical difficulties. By morning, we have a narrative ready." Ashley shook her head. "Too late. It's already on social. We've got 17 different amateur videos, and that's just in the first 10 minutes. "Then we control the interpretation," said Jennifer from PR. She pulled up a prepared statement on the main screen. "Geological phenomenon. Underwater seismic activity. Vought offers full cooperation with federal investigation." "That works until someone points out geological phenomena don't have spines," the DoD liaison said. His nameplate read Williams. "My bosses want to know what the hell you people were doing out there." Ashley smiled. It was her dealing with government smile, the one that said, "We're all professionals here," while meaning go fuck yourself. Trident was a joint research initiative. Your bosses signed off on the budget. Don't pretend this is news. William started to respond, then thought better of it. Ashley turned back to the screens. The Trident feed had gone dark 6 minutes ago. The last image showed water displacing upward in a column that defied fluid dynamics. Now there was just static and an emergency beacon that nobody was answering. "Where's Homelander?" she asked. "En route," said Marcus. "ETA 12 minutes. The rest of the 7, mobilizing." We're framing this as a rescue operation. Homelander saves the day overseas evacuation, America's protector in action. Ashley nodded. The lie was already half-formed in her mind. Not a lie exactly. More like a story that was true from a certain angle, if you didn't look too closely. Homelander would show up. There would be cameras. People would see a hero taking charge. What happened after that was a problem for later. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, just 2 words, check uplink. She frowned, then switched one of the screens to the Trident satellite feed. It should have been offline. It wasn't. Someone had hijacked the broadcast relay and was currently streaming to 43 different servers across 6 countries. The video showed Homelander's approach from a mile out. Even at that distance, the scale was wrong. The thing rising from the Pacific made Homelander look like an insect trying to intimidate a thunderstorm. Ashley grabbed her phone. "Cut that feed, now." "We're trying," Marcus said, fingers flying across his tablet. "Whoever did this knows our architecture. They're 3 steps ahead." On screen, Homelander slowed. For just a moment, less than a second, his flight path wavered. The camera caught it, zoomed in, caught it again. Ashley watched her entire morning collapse into a single frame of Homelander hesitating in midair. "Get that off the internet. It's already been downloaded 16,000 times. She closed her eyes, breathed, opened them. The crisis room was watching her, waiting for instructions, waiting for her to perform the magic trick she'd performed 100 times before turning disaster into opportunity. "Call it forced perspective," she said. "Camera angle. Distance parallax. Whatever. Get our tech people to explain why the video is misleading. Get Homelander on scene immediately, and make sure every news outlet has a live feed of him in control." Williams cleared his throat. "Ma'am, with respect, controlling the media won't help if there's an actual threat out there." "There's always an actual threat, Williams. The question is, what story we tell about it." Across town, in a basement in Brooklyn that smelled like gun oil, an old coffee Billy Butcher watched the same feed on a laptop held together with duct tape and spite. Huey sat next to him, fingers dancing across a keyboard, keeping the hijacked stream alive through 6 proxy servers and a virtual network that changed location every 90 seconds. Frenchie leaned over Huey's shoulder, watching the data flow. "Beautiful. They are trying to kill it, but we're, how do you say, cockroach?" "Unkillable," Huey said. "Yes, this." Butcher didn't take his eyes off the screen. Homelander hung in the air like a child's action figure held up by an invisible hand. Behind him, or maybe above him. The scale made it hard to tell something that belonged in a different kind of story entirely stood in water. That should have been deeper than anything could stand in. "That," Butcher said quietly, "is not supposed to exist." "Nothing about soups is supposed to exist," Huey said. "That's kind of the whole problem." "No. Homelander's a lab rat with delusions of godhood. That thing is—" He stopped. He didn't have words for what that thing was. "Annie, get us the intel." Huey nodded. "Trident Black Site, joint CIA-VOD operation, something called Project Siren." She couldn't get details, just keywords. Bioacoustic, compound V derivative, isotope storage. They were building something, or trying to control something, Frenchie said. He pointed at the screen. "Look at the way it moves. Not aggression. More like cleaning." Butcher watched the shape in the water take another step toward the burning facility. Debris scattered in its wake. Not thrown, just displaced by the simple fact of its movement. It's not even looking at Homelander, Frenchie added quietly. Whatever it came here for, it already knows what that is. Cleaning what? The mess, Frenchie said. It's not reacting to Homelander at all. Whatever it's here for, it is already decided. Huey's laptop beeped. We've got a problem. Vaught's deploying the 7, full team. They're going to turn this into a media event. Butcher smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. Let them. Keep that feed running. I want every second of this recorded. When Homelander gets his arse handed to him by something he can't laser eye into submission, I want the whole world to watch. And if people die while we're watching? People are already dying, Huey. People been dying since Vought started playing God with Compound Vichy. Difference is tonight, everyone gets to see what happens when you meet something that don't care about your PR strategy. The laptop screen split into multiple feeds. Someone, probably Annie working her magic from inside Vought Tower, had patched them into the 7's tactical channel. Homelander's voice came through first artificially calm, in that way that meant he was 3 seconds from snapping. I have visual on the target. It's big, really big. I'm going to need the team on this. Copy that, Homelander. Deep, how close can you get? The Deep's voice crackled back, nervous. I'm trying to communicate with marine life in the area. They're all running. Everything's running. Running from what? That was Starlight, sounding tired in a way that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion. From the Deep cut off. Then quieter. Oh shit. The feed showed what he was seeing. The thing had stopped moving. Not because anything had stopped it, but because it had reached its destination. Trident sat in the water ahead, listening to one side flames, eating through the support structure. For a moment, nothing happened. The thing stood there massive and patient and utterly still. Then its back began to glow. Not the white-hot glow of fire or electricity. Something older. Something that came from inside, from biological processes that had nothing to do with chemistry or physics as humans understood them. Blue light traced along its spine in patterns that hurt to look at. That's not good, Huey said. Butcher leaned closer to the screen. No, but it's perfect. The thing opened its mouth. What came out wasn't a roar. It was more fundamental than that. More like the sound of the ocean deciding it had somewhere else to be. The camera shook even though it was a mile away. On the tactical feed, someone screamed. The blue light intensified, building to something that made the air itself seem wrong. The glow concentrated, focusing toward the throat energy coiling inward, like a star collapsing into itself. And stopped there, waiting. A promise of annihilation held in check by nothing except the creature's own decision. The tactical feed dissolved into chaos. Multiple voices shouting, someone crying. The Deep saying Jesus Christ over and over like a prayer that wouldn't take. And underneath it all, steady and calm, and already spinning the narrative, Ashley Barrett's voice. Remember your heroes. Act like it. Cameras are watching. Butcher turned to Huey. You getting all this every second? Good. Because tomorrow morning the whole world's going to wake up and see what happens when Vaught's bullshit meets something that doesn't read the script. On screen, Homelander gathered himself, straightened his posture, smoothed his cape. The camera caught his face in profile for just a moment, and Butcher saw it, the calculation behind the eyes, the absolute refusal to acknowledge that he might be looking at something larger than himself. Homelander flew forward, laser eyes already glowing red. The thing in the water didn't turn its head. The blue light along its spine pulsed, brighter energy building in its throat like a caged sun. Here we go, Butcher said softly. Let's see how America's greatest hero handles meeting a god that doesn't give a fuck about him. Homelander had been the most powerful thing in the sky for his entire life. That certainty didn't waver as he approached the burning wreckage of Trident. It couldn't waver. The moment he acknowledged doubt, the moment he considered the possibility that something might exist outside his reach, the entire architecture of his identity would collapse. So he didn't consider it. He flew forward, heat vision warming behind his eyes, and told himself this was just another threat. Bigger than usual, yes. Stranger. But ultimately the same as everything else, something that would learn to kneel or learn to burn. The thing in the water still hadn't turned its head. Homelander, wait for backup. That was Starlight's voice in his ear, careful and controlled. She'd learned to speak to him the way you'd speak to explosives. We should assess before engaging. He muted the comm. The blue glow along the creature's spine pulsed like a heartbeat made of radiation. Up close, the scale was worse. Homelander had leveled buildings. He'd lifted planes. He understood mass and force in a way most people never would. This thing wasn't just large. It redefined what large meant. Each ridge along its back could have served as the keel for an aircraft carrier. And it was ignoring him completely. That was what made him act. Not strategy, not calculation, but the simple, unacceptable fact of being dismissed. His heat vision lanced out twin beams of concentrated fury that had melted through bank vaults and enemy bunkers, and anyone who'd ever been stupid enough to stand in his way. The beams hit the creature's shoulder and splashed. That was the only word for it. They didn't penetrate or burn or even seem to register as an attack. They just dispersed across armored hide that had been walking through radiation and pressure and time since before humans learned to make fire. For a fraction of a second, Homelander's brain couldn't process what his eyes were seeing. Then the creature moved, not toward him. It simply shifted its weight, adjusting stance the way you'd shift to avoid a mosquito. The motion created a pressure wave that hit Homelander like a physical wall. Air compressed, displaced, shoved aside by the reality of that much mass-changing position. He tumbled backward through the sky cape, whipping control lost for 3 full seconds that felt like falling forever. When he recovered, the creature had already turned its attention back to Trident. The facility's central structure groaned under its own weight, metal screaming as support beams gave way. Whatever this thing had come here to do, it was doing it. Homelander's entire existence might as well have been a weather phenomenon for all the consideration it received. Rage flooded through him, the pure, clean fury of a god being ignored by its own creation. He dove. The impact should have mattered. At his speed with his mass behind it, the kinetic force should have registered. He hit the creature's back, directly targeting the base of the spine, putting everything he had into the strike. It felt like punching a continent. The shock traveled up his arms into his shoulders, rattling teeth he'd never had to worry about before. The creature didn't flinch, didn't pause, just kept walking through water that barely reached its knees each step, sending waves outward in perfect concentric circles. Homelander hit it again. His fists blurred each impact, generating sonic booms that shattered what remained of Trident's windows. He'd torn through reinforced steel with less effort. He'd beaten opponents into paste with casual swings. The hide beneath his fists didn't crack, didn't bend, didn't acknowledge his existence. Homelander, you need to pull back. Starlight again, signal forcing through, even though he'd muted the channel. It's not working. Whatever you're doing, it's not. He flew up, gained altitude, and came down like a missile. His shoulder hit the creature's neck with enough force to level a city block. The impact created a shockwave that sent debris scattering for a quarter-mile. The creature took another step forward. That was when Homelander felt it. A sensation he'd never experienced before, one he didn't have vocabulary for, because he'd never needed it. His invulnerability was absolute. Nothing touched him. Nothing hurt him. But as the creature's tail swung with the casual physics of its movement, as the appendage clipped him in passing, not attacking, just existing in the same space he happened to occupy, something in his ribs flexed. Not broke. Not yet, but flexed in a way that suggested the possibility of breaking, and that possibility was more terrifying than any pain could have been. He shot backward, putting distance between himself and the thing. And that was when the cameras caught him. Every angle, every satellite feed, every hijacked stream the boys were broadcasting to 47 servers across 6 continents. They caught the moment Homelander retreated. In Vought Tower, Ashley Barrett watched her career die in real time. "Cut the feed," she said again, knowing it was useless, knowing the boys had control and weren't letting go. "Get me damage control. Get me the lawyers. Get me someone who can explain why our most valuable asset just got bitch-slapped by Godzilla." She'd said it. The word everyone was thinking, but nobody was supposed to speak. Godzilla, not the target, not the threat. The thing that had been sleeping in legends and atomic bomb tests and late-night monster movies, the one that wasn't supposed to be real. Williams, the DoD liaison, stood frozen by the window. That's not possible. The Monarch files were sealed. Everything from 2014 to 2019 was buried under executive order. "Well, something dug it up," Ashley snapped. "Or it dug itself up. I don't care about the taxonomy right now. I care about the fact that Homelander is losing on camera and we have no narrative for this." On screen, the rest of the 7 arrived. A-Train hit the water at Mach speed, creating a wake that should have been impressive under any other circumstances. The deep dove beneath the surface, probably trying to summon something that would help, as if whales or sharks or whatever lived at this depth would take orders from a C-list hero when an alpha predator had just announced its presence. Maeve landed on a floating piece of debris, took one look at the situation, and started directing evacuation efforts. The only one of them with any sense. The creature's dorsal plates flared brighter. Energy concentrated, building toward the release that had been promised at the end of Act 1. The air temperature spiked. Seawater began to boil in a radius that expanded outward like a target circle with Trident at its center. "Everyone out." Maeve's voice cut through the tactical channel. "Right now. This isn't a fight. It's a fucking execution, and we're in the blast zone." "Belay that," Homelander said. His voice had gone quiet. Dangerous. The tone he used right before he lasered someone's skull into vapor. "Nobody retreats. We're the 7. We don't run from..." The creature opened its mouth. What came out wasn't sound. It was older than sound. It was the noise the ocean made when it first learned to be angry. The roar of tectonic plates grinding together, the voice of something that had been here before cities and would be here after they crumbled into interesting fossils. Every member of the 7 stopped moving. In Brooklyn, Huey gripped the table edge so hard his knuckles went white. "Jesus Christ, it's really going to do it?" "Of course it is," Butcher said. He was smiling. Actually smiling, watching Homelander hover in midair with the expression of someone whose entire worldview was being rewritten against his will. "It came here to clean up. Everything else is just noise." The blue glow reached critical mass. Energy poured from the creature's throat in a column that made nuclear tests look like birthday candles. It hit Trident's central tower, not with explosive force, but with erasure. The structure didn't melt or collapse. It transitioned from solid matter into component atoms, then into light, then into absence. The beam lasted 4 seconds. When it stopped, there was a hole in reality where the tower used to be. The ocean rushed in to fill the vacuum. Steam rose in a column that reached the cloud layer. The shock wave expanded outward in a ring of compressed air that set off car alarms in Honolulu. Homelander hung in the air cape singed, watching his reflection in the creature's eye for just a moment. The creature looked through him. Not at, through. As if he were glass or air, or nothing at all worth noticing. Then it turned and began walking back toward deeper water. The fight was over. It had never really been a fight. Homelander had simply been in the area when a natural disaster decided to correct an imbalance. A-Train was the first to speak. Did that just happen? Shut up, Homelander said. No, seriously, did we just watch? I said shut up. His voice had gone dead, flat. The fury had burned itself out and left something worse behind. Nobody says anything. Nobody files a report. This didn't happen. But it had happened. Every second had been recorded. The boys had seen to that. And in 47 countries, people were watching footage of Homelander. Unbeatable, unstoppable, perfect Homelander being dismissed by something that didn't care about his power or his brand or his image. In Vought Tower, Ashley was already on the phone with crisis management. I need 3 independent analysis firms to explain why the footage is fake. I need scientists to talk about camera artifacts. She stopped. Williams was pointing at another screen. The hijacked feed had switched to split screen. On one side, Homelander, hovering in the steam and wreckage. On the other, a simple text crawl. Vought International, Project Trident. Illegal bioweapons development. Isotope smuggling. CIA, black budget fraud. Below that, a single line. This is what happens when you play God. The feed cut. Not because Vought had stopped it, but because the boys had gotten what they needed and decided the message was clear enough. Ashley set down her phone, picked it up, set it down again. We're going to need a bigger narrative, she said quietly. Homelander landed on what was left of Trident's landing platform. His boots hit metal that was still hot from proximity to that beam. He stood there, perfect posture, perfect hair, perfect suit. Everything about him screamed invincible hero. But the cameras had caught it. That fraction of a second when he'd retreated. When something in his ribs had flexed, and he'd felt the possibility of mortality. Starlight landed next to him, careful, keeping distance. Are you? Don't. He cut her off without looking at her. Don't ask if I'm okay. Don't ask what happened. Don't ask anything. She looked at him. Really looked the way she'd learned to do after 2 years of working alongside him. She saw what he couldn't admit for the first time in his life. Homelander had encountered something that wouldn't acknowledge him as supreme. And he had no idea how to exist in that reality. In the distance, the creature's dorsal plates faded from blue to dark. It sank beneath the surface without ceremony, without acknowledging the destruction it had caused, without caring that it had just rewritten the rules of every power structure on the planet. The ocean closed over it like a grave or a promise. Starlight activated her comm. This is Starlight. Trident is lost. We're beginning search and rescue for survivors, requesting immediate evac support and media blackout. Denied, came Ashley's voice, sharp with the edge of someone holding panic at arm's length. You're heroes. Get in front of the cameras and explain how you saved people. I don't care if you have to pull bodies out of the water, make it look heroic. Starlight looked at Homelander. He stood perfectly still, staring at the spot where the creature had submerged. His jaw worked like he was trying to chew through the reality of what had just happened. "Homelander," she said carefully, "we should help with rescue." He didn't move, didn't blink. For 5 full seconds he stood there processing the impossible. Then his mouth moved. It didn't even fight back. "What? It didn't fight me, it just..." He stopped, started again. "I hit it. Multiple times, full force, and it didn't defend itself, didn't attack, it just tolerated me like I was weather." Starlight didn't know what to say to that. What do you tell a god when he discovers he's not one? Homelander's fists clenched, unclenched. "Find out everything about that thing. Everything Vought knows. Everything Monarch had. Everything." Monarch's files were destroyed. Then find who destroyed them. Find who knew. Find... His voice cracked just slightly. He swallowed it, forced calm back into his tone. "Find something I can kill." He lifted off, heading back toward shore, leaving Starlight standing on burning wreckage in the middle of the Pacific. She watched him go and thought about the text crawl the boys had broadcast. This is what happens when you play God. Not when you fail at being God. When you meet something that proves you were never God at all. Her calm crackled. Huey's voice encrypted and careful. "Annie, you okay?" She looked at the water where the creature had vanished. Looked at the hole in space where Trident's tower used to exist. Thought about the people who'd been inside, the scientists and guards and techs, who'd just been doing their jobs for the wrong company. "No," she said quietly, "but I'm alive. Some people aren't that lucky." "We're releasing the Trident files in 1 hour," Huey said. "Full disclosure, everything Vought was doing out there, the world needs to know." "Will it change anything?" Silence on the line. "Then, I don't know. But hiding it sure as hell hasn't worked." The call cut. Starlight activated her powers, lighting up the wreckage to help search teams see through the smoke. It was a small thing, probably useless, but it was all she could do. Be a light in the dark, even when the dark was bigger than anyone had imagined. Even when the light wasn't enough. The beam didn't announce itself. It simply existed as if the space between the creature's mouth and Trident's central tower had always been filled with light that could unmake matter. What came out wasn't fire or plasma or any kind of energy humans had learned to weaponize. It was something older, something that had been cooking in radioactive trenches since the planet learned to split atoms on its own. The column burned blue-white, impossibly bright, impossibly concentrated, and where it touched Trident's reinforced steel and concrete, those materials stopped being solid. Not melted, not vaporized, just transitioned from existence to absence. The tower stood for perhaps half a second, its structure trying to process what was happening to it. Then physics gave up, and several thousand tons of horrifyingly engineered architecture became light and heat, and particles that would take weeks to settle back to Earth. The beam cut off. Silence fell across the Pacific, broken only by the sound of ocean rushing in, to fill the space where a building used to be. Steam rose in columns that reached toward clouds. The shockwave rippled outward, a ring of compressed air that rattled windows along the Hawaiian coast and sent seismographs jumping as far inland as Nevada. In their safe house, Huey stared at the screen with an expression usually reserved for religious experiences or severe trauma. "Holy shit." "Yeah," Butcher said quietly. He was still smiling, but it had changed, gotten sharper. "That's what playing God gets you. A reminder that you ain't." Frenchie made a sound that might have been a laugh or a prayer. 4 seconds. 4 seconds, and it erased what took them 3 years to build. "Keep recording," Butcher said. "This ain't over." At Vought Tower, Ashley Barrett had stopped trying to manage the crisis. You couldn't manage this. You could only watch it happen and try to remember how to breathe. "Ma'am," one of her assistants. A kid fresh out of Princeton with a marketing degree and no idea what he'd signed up for. Should we issue a statement?" She looked at him. Really looked. Saw the fear poorly hidden behind professional training. "A statement about what? That one of our black site facilities just got deleted by something that isn't supposed to exist? That we've been running illegal weapons development for the CIA? That Homelander can't even get its attention?" I don't know." "Neither do I." She turned back to the screens. "So we say nothing. We wait. And we pray that whatever happens next is something we can spin." On the tactical feed, what was left of the 7 had pulled back to a safe distance. Safe being relative when you were dealing with something that could erase buildings with a beam of concentrated prehistory. "Homelander, you need to fall back further." That was Maeve, her voice carrying the weight of someone who'd stopped being surprised by catastrophe. "There's nothing left to save here." "I'm not retreating." "You already did that. I watched you do it. So did 47 million people on live stream." His silence spoke volumes. The creature stood motionless in the water, that ancient head tilted slightly as if listening to something only it could hear. Then it began to move. Not toward deeper water like everyone hoped. Toward the remains of Trident's submerged sections, where the real facility had been all along. Where Project Leviathan was kept. "Oh, bloody hell," Butcher muttered, watching the feed. They actually did it. They actually tried to make their own. The water ahead of the creature began to churn, not from its movement, but from something rising beneath. Something that had been sleeping in reinforced containment until the shockwave from the beam had cracked every seal and failsafe. The screens in Vought Tower lit up with alerts. Biometric readings spiking. Compound V concentrations at toxic levels. Radiation signatures that matched nothing in their database. Williams, the DoD liaison, had gone pale. That's impossible. The Leviathan prototype wasn't supposed to be viable for another 2 years. Viable for what? Ashley demanded. Deterrence. We were building a countermeasure. A countermeasure to what? He pointed at the screen, at the creature standing in the water like a judge waiting for the accused to present themselves. To that, in case it ever came back. The water exploded upward. What emerged was large, easily the size of a naval destroyer, its hide slick with nutrient gel and chemical accelerants. It had been grown in tanks, fed by compound V derivatives, raised in an environment saturated with controlled radiation, shaped by siren conditioning to respond to commands that would never come now that the facility was slag. It looked like someone had tried to recreate Godzilla from a photograph seen once, while drunk. The proportions were wrong, the dorsal plates too symmetrical, too obviously manufactured. Its eyes held the manic gleam of something that had never known anything except containment and pain, and the chemical certainty that it was meant to be a weapon. Leviathan roared. It was a sound designed in a lab, amplified by biological speakers that some engineer thought would be intimidating. It sounded like a car alarm crossed with a dying whale. The creature, the real one, the one that had been walking this planet since before humans invented hubris, turned its head. For the first time, it gave something its full attention. Leviathan charged. Not with strategy or intelligence, but with the simple certainty of something bred to fight, and nothing else. It crashed through the water jaws, open, revealing teeth that had been sharpened in a lab and bonded to synthetic enamel stronger than anything nature produced. The impact should have mattered. Leviathan had been designed to matter, grown to exact specifications, trained on simulations that predicted every variable. But you can't simulate ancient. The creature caught Leviathan's charge with one claw, a movement almost casual, and held it there. For a moment they stood locked together, the fake and the genuine lab-grown muscle against muscle that had been tested by millions of years of natural selection. Then the creature's other claw came up. What followed wasn't a fight. It was a lesson in the difference between being built for war and being born from it. The creature's claws tore through Leviathan's hide like it was made of wet paper. Compound value-enhanced muscle parted under pressure that didn't care about chemical reinforcement. The lab-grown monster tried to rally, tried to use the heat vents built into its throat, managed to produce a gout of flame that would have melted through a tank. The creature walked through it without slowing. Leviathan's tail whipped around, equipped with synthetic barbs that some designer thought would be an improvement over natural design. They shattered against ancient armor that had tanked nuclear tests. "It's not even trying," Frenchie said, watching the feed. "Look at how it moves. This is not a battle. This is, how do you say, pest control." Butcher nodded slowly. "They spent billions on that thing. Grew it in a tank, fed it drugs that would kill a normal creature, all to make something that could stand up to a force of nature. And it's getting torn apart in less than a minute. Because you can't fake what that thing is. You can only borrow the shape and hope nobody notices you're hollow inside." The creature gripped Leviathan by the throat and simply squeezed. The lab-grown monster thrashed, clawed, fired every weapon system it had been equipped with. Heat vents blazed. Synthetic poison glands released toxins that would have killed anything else in the ocean. The creature's grip tightened. There was a sound like breaking pottery, except the pottery was made of bone and had cost $3 billion to grow. Leviathan went limp. The creature held it for a moment longer, as if making sure the lesson was clear, then released it. The body sank without ceremony. The creature turned back toward Trident's submerged sections. Its dorsal plates began to glow again. "Oh, Christ," Ashley whispered. "It's not done." The second beam was briefer than the first, but somehow worse. It carved through water and metal and carefully hidden sins, exposing reactor chambers and isotope storage, and all the things Vought had built in the name of security and profit, and the absolute certainty that they could control nature if they just applied enough money and science. The chamber exploded. Not from the beam directly, but from what happened when you exposed that much enriched material to that much heat that fast. The blast was small by nuclear standards, barely registering as a tactical yield, but it was enough. Enough to vaporize the last traces of Trident. Enough to send a column of fire and debris climbing into the afternoon sky. Enough to make very clear what had been happening in this facility and who had been paying for it. The creature stood in the center of the blast zone, completely unbothered, and surveyed the results without expression. Then it began to walk toward deeper water. "It's leaving," someone said on the tactical feed. Might have been the deep. Hard to tell through the static and shock. "Let it," Maeve said. "We got lucky it didn't decide we were part of the mess." Homelander said nothing. He hung in the air downwind from the blast, watching the creature wade back toward the trench it had emerged from. His fists were clenched so tight, his knuckles had gone white beneath the gloves. Starlight drifted closer, careful not to spook him. "It's over. We should help with containment." It dismissed me. His voice was soft, wondering. like he was trying to make sense of a language he'd never heard before. "I'm the Homelander. I'm the most powerful—" He stopped, started again, and it looked through me like I was nothing. "Maybe that's not about you." He turned to look at her, and she saw something in his eyes that scared her more than his anger ever had. Uncertainty. "Then what the fuck is it about?" She didn't have an answer for that. The hijacked feed cut to split screen. On one side, the blast plume rising over the Pacific. On the other, a simple text crawl that the boys had prepared: Project Leviathan, Vought, CIA, bioweapon development, illegal compound, vive experimentation, unauthorized nuclear material. Below that, this is what happens when you try to weaponize nature. It comes back and corrects you. The feed held for 10 seconds, letting the message sink in, then cut to black. In their safe house, Butcher leaned back in his chair. "Right. That's the appetizer done. Now we wait for the main course." "What main course?" Huey asked. "The part where Vought tries to explain why they were building kaiju in the Pacific while taking government money to protect America." He smiled. "And the part where Homelander realizes he ain't the biggest monster in the ocean anymore." At Vought Tower, phones were already ringing. Congressional oversight committees, military liaisons, foreign intelligence services. Every regulatory body that Vought had spent decades bribing into complacency suddenly wanted answers about the nuclear explosion in the Pacific and the creature-shaped hole in their narrative about American supremacy. Ashley looked at the screens at the blast column still climbing toward the clouds, at the footage of Homelander being ignored, at the creature walking calmly back into the depths like a janitor finishing their shift. "We're going to need a bigger lie," she said quietly. Williams shook his head. "There isn't a lie big enough for this." She knew he was right. But she also knew that Vought had been built on lies big enough to swallow countries. They'd find something. They always did. The question was whether anyone would still be listening. On the tactical feed, the creature's dorsal plates faded from blue to dark. It sank beneath the surface without looking back, without acknowledging that it had just rewritten every assumption humanity held about its place in the natural order. The ocean closed over it. The world kept spinning. And somewhere in a safe house, Billy Butcher watched the news channels explode into chaos and thought about the beautiful simplicity of watching powerful people realize their power had limits. "Oi, Huey," he said. "Make sure we save all of this, every second." "What for?" Butcher's smile went sharp. "To remind people what happens when gods meet something bigger." The creature was gone, returned to whatever depths had hidden it. But the consequences were just beginning. At Vought Tower, phones were ringing. At the Pentagon, committees were forming. And somewhere in the Pacific, radiation readings were climbing. The world kept spinning. And Butcher watched it spin, knowing that for once, the powerful had learned they weren't. The coastal facility was never meant to be noticed. 40 miles south of Trident, tucked into a cliff face that maps listed as geological research, it served a single-purpose containment. Specifically, the containment of one man who'd been too dangerous to kill and too valuable to forget. Soldier Boy had been sleeping in cryogenic suspension for months, frozen at the exact moment between rage and unconsciousness, kept stable by a system that drew power from the same grid that fed Trident's operations. The same grid that was currently experiencing catastrophic failure. The technician on duty, a civilian contractor named Morrison, who'd taken this job because it paid well and required him to do almost nothing, watched his monitors flash red in sequence. Primary power failure. Backup systems engaging. The backup systems did not engage. They pulled electricity from reserves that should have been sufficient, and discovered that the electromagnetic pulse from Trident's destruction had corrupted every relay station between here and the mainland. Shit. Morrison reached for the emergency protocols manual. Flipped to the section marked Cryogenic Failure. Read the first line. In the event of power loss exceeding 30 minutes, begin evacuation procedures and notify DOD immediately. He checked his watch. They'd lost power 6 minutes ago. He picked up the phone. Dead. Tried his cell. No signal. The pulse had taken out communications, too. Morrison looked at the cryo chamber through reinforced glass. Inside Soldier Boy floated in suspension gel still perfectly preserved. A relic from another era when America thought it could build heroes out of chemistry and violence and call it patriotism. The temperature gauge on the chamber began to climb. 20 miles away, the creature finished its work and began walking toward deeper water. Its passage created waves that reached the coastal facility 3 minutes later. Small swells that shouldn't have mattered, except they hit at the exact wrong moment. The facility's emergency generators kicked in, struggled against damaged circuits, and managed to restore power for exactly 8 seconds before overloading. In those 8 seconds, the cryo chamber's fail-safes registered the temperature spike attempted to compensate and flooded the chamber with a chemical cocktail designed to prevent cellular damage during thaw. The chamber's audio system connected to the same power grid crackled to life. An automated alarm, the same tone that had accompanied weapons tests during the Cold War. The same frequency that had been playing when Soldier Boy was first exposed to the chemicals that made him. The same trigger that had been living in his nervous system for decades, waiting. His eyes opened. Morrison saw it happen through the glass and reached for the lockdown button. He was a civilian contractor. He'd read the file, knew what this man was capable of, understood in an abstract way that he was looking at something that could level cities. But he'd never seen those eyes open before. Never seen the moment when something that had been human remembered it wasn't anymore. Soldier Boy's fist went through the cryo chamber glass like it was made of sugar. The alarm kept screaming. In Vought Tower, deep in the sub-basement, where the real security systems ran an automated alert, pinged a server that had been programmed to notify exactly 3 people in the event of certain keywords appearing in monitoring systems. Keywords like Soldier Boy and Containment Breach and Active. Ashley Barrett's phone buzzed. She looked at the notification, looked at the screen still showing footage of Trident burning and Homelander's humiliation, and felt something in her chest that might have been her last nerve finally snapping. "You have got to be fucking kidding me." Her assistant looked up. "Ma'am." "Get me DOD, get me CIA, get me anyone who knows anything about coastal containment facilities." She pulled up the alert details. Grid failure, power loss, cryo systems compromised, last known status breach imminent. What's happening? Ashley closed her eyes, opened them. The ghost of America's war crimes just woke up. And he's going to be very confused and very angry. At the coastal facility Morrison was running, the protocol manual had been very clear about what to do if containment failed. Evacuate immediately, trigger the facility's self-destruct sequence, and pray that whoever responded found enough pieces to identify the bodies. He made it to the hallway before the door behind him exploded outward. Soldier Boy stood in the wreckage, dripping with suspension gel, naked, except for decades of muscle memory and trauma. He looked at Morrison with eyes that hadn't processed time passing, that still thought this was 1984 and the Cold War was hot and someone needed to pay for whatever had just happened. "Where?" His voice voice came out rough, unused. "Where am I?" Morrison kept backing away. "Sir, you need to calm down. You've been in suspension. You're safe. Everything's—" The alarm was still screaming. Soldier Boy's face twisted, not with rage, with something worse. Recognition. The sound burrowing into neural pathways carved by repeated exposure and chemical conditioning, finding the place where they'd buried his controls and pulling them all at once. His chest began to glow. Morrison had 3 seconds to realize he was about to die. He spent them thinking about his daughter's college fund and whether the hazard pay would cover it. The blast vaporized him and the entire east wing of the facility. The shock wave traveled through rock and water, creating a seismic event that registered on every monitoring station from San Diego to Seattle. In their safe house, Frenchie's equipment picked up the signature immediately. Mon Dieu, that is not from the creature. Butcher looked at the readings, recognized the pattern from classified files he'd stolen 2 years ago. That's Soldier Boy. The septic bastards kept him this close to Trident. Probably sharing infrastructure, Huey said, fingers already pulling up satellite footage. If the facilities were linked, Trident going down could have triggered a cascade failure. Right. So now we've got a confused superweapon with PTSD waking up to alarms and no context. Butcher smiled, but it was the kind of smile that suggested incoming violence. This day just keeps getting better. On the tactical feed, Homelander's head snapped toward the coastal facility. His hearing, enhanced beyond human limits, had caught the blast even at this distance. What was that? Maeve checked her instruments. Energy signature. Big one. Coastal facility 40 miles south. I didn't authorize any. Homelander stopped. Thought. Is that where they're keeping him? Keeping who? But Homelander was already flying cape streaming behind him, heading toward the source of the blast, with a kind of single-minded purpose that suggested he'd found something he could actually hit. At the coastal facility, Soldier Boy stood in the crater he'd created and tried to remember how breathing worked. The blast had taken everything Wall's equipment, the people who'd been keeping him frozen. He felt hollowed out, like something had reached into his chest and scooped out everything, except the rage. The alarm had stopped, died with the power systems. He looked at his hands, looked at the ocean in the distance, tried to piece together where he was and when it was, and why every instinct he had was screaming, "Run." Then he felt it. That presence he'd been bred to recognize, the one that every cell in his body identified as threat. Another alpha. Close. Homelander landed 50 feet away, boots hitting concrete with enough force to crack it. They looked at each other across the wreckage. The hero of the 80s and the hero of the now. The original model and the upgrade. Father and son in the way that labs understood family. They told me you were secured, Homelander said. His voice was still wrong, still carrying that flatness that meant something had broken inside. They told me you'd never get out. Soldier Boy stared at him. Processed features that looked like his own processed the suit, the stance, the absolute certainty in the way this man stood. Who the hell are you? I'm you, better version. They took what made you and fixed the parts that didn't work. Homelander's fists clenched. They made me perfect. Soldier Boy looked at him for a long moment. Then very quietly, "You think you're perfect? I know I am. Perfect doesn't get scared." He gestured at Homelander's singed cape, the burns from being too close to something that didn't care about perfection. "You smell like fear and failure." Homelander's eyes lit up red. "What did you just—" Soldier Boy's chest glowed in response. Not intentionally. Just a reflex, the way you'd raise fists if someone squared up. Two weapons recognizing each other, two products of the same program that turned men into gods and wondered why the gods couldn't stop being men. "Stand down," Homelander said. "I'm giving you one chance." Funny. I was about to say the same thing. They moved simultaneously. The collision sent a shockwave across the Pacific that capsized 3 fishing boats and shattered windows in coastal towns. They traded blows with the casual destruction of people who'd never learned there were things they couldn't punch through. Homelander's heat vision lanced out. Soldier Boy tanked it, walked through it, got close enough to grab Homelander's cape and use it to slam him into the cliff face. Rocks shattered. Homelander emerged snarling, returned the favor with a haymaker that sent Soldier Boy through what was left of the facility's main structure. This wasn't strategy, wasn't tactics. Just two products of American exceptionalism trying to prove which flavor of manufactured supremacy was superior. 20 miles away, the creature paused mid-step. It had been walking toward the deep task completed when something registered. Not the fight that was just noise, but the energy signature from Soldier Boy's blast still radiating from the coastal facility. Another source of imbalance, another wound in the natural order that needed closing. It turned around. In their safe house, Butcher watched the feeds. "Oh, bloody hell, it's not done." The creature began moving back towards shore, its path locked on the coastal facility, with the same mechanical certainty it had shown approaching Trident. This wasn't about the soups fighting there. This was about finishing what it had come to do. Its dorsal plates began to glow. Homelander had Soldier Boy in a chokehold when every instinct he had suddenly screamed danger. Not from Soldier Boy, from something else. Something approaching. He let go of Soldier Boy and turned. The creature stood in shallow water 300 yards away, advancing on the facility. Not on them. On the site itself, the source of the energy signature that had pulled it back. "No." It came out small, desperate. "No, not again. I'm not." Soldier Boy, still processing what was happening, still trying to understand why Homelander had just frozen, followed his gaze to the creature. And every survival instinct he'd buried under bravado suddenly fired at once. "What the fuck is that? Run." Homelander's voice was hollow. "Just run." The creature's mouth opened. That ancient throat began to glow. Soldier Boy didn't think. Training kicked in the part that recognized when you were outmatched, when all the power in the world wouldn't save you, when the only option was to not be where the danger was about to happen. He launched himself into the air, pure survival reflex. Homelander was already moving, had been moving the moment he recognized what was coming. But Soldier Boy's trajectory intersected with his, and suddenly they were both airborne, both fleeing the same threat, tangled together by accident and a panic. The beam carved through the space they'd occupied half a second earlier. The cliff face simply ceased to exist, replaced by a canyon that filled immediately with ocean water. The creature held the beam for 2 seconds, then cut it off, surveyed the results with that same neutral expression, and turned back toward the deep. This time, nothing stopped it. No more facilities. No more artificial alphas. No more imbalances requiring correction. Its dorsal plates faded from blue to dark as it walked. Each step took it farther from shore, deeper into water that welcomed it like coming home. Homelander and Soldier Boy landed on the beach a mile north, both breathing hard, both trying to process what had just happened. Homelander started, then stopped. He didn't know how to finish that sentence. "We escaped. We survived. We ran." Soldier Boy looked at him. Looked at this thing, wearing his face, claiming to be better proven, just as powerless. "We got lucky." That thing wasn't aiming for us. It was aiming for the facility. We just happened to be standing in the way. It wasn't trying to kill us. It was just cleaning up, yeah. Soldier Boy sat down on the sand. Everything hurt. Everything had been hurting since he woke up. How long was I out? Years? And in all those years, you never ran into anything that made you feel this small. Homelander didn't answer. Figured. Soldier Boy looked at the water where the creature had vanished. They tried to make us into that. Make us into forces of nature. But you can't manufacture what that thing is. You can only borrow the shape and hope nobody notices you're hollow. The words hung in the air between them. An old relic talking to his replacement, both of them staring at the ocean that had just swallowed proof of their irrelevance. Homelander's phone buzzed. Ashley. He ignored it. What do we do now? He asked quietly. Soldier Boy stood up, brushed sand off his borrowed pants, he'd found some in the wreckage, and started walking inland. Now, we figure out what year it is. And then I need a drink. Homelander watched him go, looked back at the ocean, at the spot where something had reminded him that power had limits. His phone buzzed. Ashley. Then again, the world wanting answers. He looked at his hands. They were shaking. In their safe house, Butcher closed the laptop. You getting all this? He asked Huey. Every second. Good. He stood up, stretched. Let's give it 12 hours. Let them sweat. Then we release everything. The ocean was calm again. The creature had returned to depths where sunlight couldn't reach. Above the world scrambled to understand, to explain, to spin. And the boys prepared to make that impossible. The footage dropped at 3 a.m. Eastern Time. No press release, no dramatic announcement. Just a simple post on 40 different platforms, simultaneously tagged with coordinates, timestamps, and a single line of text. This is what your heroes look like when they meet something real. By sunrise, it had been viewed 60 million times. By noon, Vaught's stock had dropped 18%. By evening, 3 congressional committees had announced emergency hearings. Ashley Barrett sat in her office watching the numbers climb and realized she'd been preparing for the wrong disaster. She'd built contingencies for scandals, for deaths, for Homelander snapping and killing someone on camera. She'd never planned for this proof that everything Vought sold was a lie wrapped in marketing and desperation. Her phone rang. The board. She let it go to voicemail. On every screen, the same footage played in loops. Homelander's heat vision splashing uselessly, his retreat captured from 6 angles, the creature dismissing him like weather, the blast that erased Trident, Leviathan torn apart in under a minute, Soldier Boy and Homelander fleeing together, 2 gods reduced to running animals. And underneath it all, the documents. Project Trident, Project Siren, Compound Vive experimentation, isotope smuggling, CIA black budget fraud. Everything Vought had buried now, trending on social media with the kind of virality that money couldn't buy and couldn't kill. The board meeting would demand answers she didn't have. The lawyers would want strategies that didn't exist. The PR team would craft statements that nobody would believe. For the first time in her career, Ashley Barrett had no spin that would work. She opened her desk drawer, found the bottle she kept for catastrophic failures, poured 2 fingers. The world was burning, and all she could do was watch. In a motel room 40 miles outside the city, Soldier Boy sat on a bed that smelled like bleach and regret, watching the news coverage on a television that predated the internet. The anchor was explaining very carefully that the footage appeared authentic, but experts were still analyzing it for signs of manipulation. He almost laughed. They were trying to explain away something they'd seen with their own eyes because accepting it would mean admitting they'd been lied to about everything. Very American. The door opened. Homelander stood there, still in his suit cape draped over one shoulder, like he'd forgotten how to take it off. "They're saying it's fake," Homelander said. His voice was flat, empty. "Of course they are." Soldier Boy gestured at the screen. "Accepting the truth means accepting they're powerless. People don't like feeling powerless. We're not powerless. We ran, both of us, from something that didn't even consider us a threat worth acknowledging. When he took a drink from the motel's minibar vodka, that's the definition of powerless." Homelander stood in the doorway, not quite in, not quite out. "They made us to be gods. They made us to be weapons that looked like gods. There's a difference." Soldier Boy nodded at the television. "And now everyone knows it. So what do we do?" The question hung in the air. Two manufactured heroes, their illusions stripped away, trying to figure out what they were without the lie. "You," Soldier Boy finished the vodka. "You go back to Vought. You let them rebuild your image. You pretend this never happened and hope people forget. And you, I'm going to disappear. Properly this time. Because I'm too old and too tired to pretend I'm anything except what they made me." He looked at Homelander. "You should do the same. But you won't. You need the cameras too much." Homelander's jaw tightened. He wanted to argue, wanted to prove this broken relic wrong. But they'd both seen the footage. They'd both felt what it was like to run from something that wouldn't even turn its head to watch them flee. He left without another word. Soldier Boy watched him go and thought about all the things they'd tried to make them into. Super soldiers, heroes, gods. All of it hollow, all of it manufactured, all of it proven false by something that simply was. The news switched to footage of the ocean. Calm, empty. No sign of the creature that had rewritten the rules. Scientists were already speculating about where it had gone. Military analysts were discussing contingencies. Politicians were promising investigations. None of it mattered. The thing was gone, returned to whatever depths had hidden it, uninterested in the noise it had left behind. Soldier Boy turned off the television and lay back on the motel bed. Tomorrow he'd disappear. Find somewhere quiet. Try to remember what it felt like to be human before they'd made him into something else. Tonight, he'd just sleep. For the first time in decades, he was too tired to dream. In their safe house, the boys watched the fallout spread. "Vaught's calling it doctored footage," Huey said, scrolling through their response statements. "They're threatening legal action. Let them threaten." Butcher leaned back in his chair. "We've got the raw files, metadata, satellite confirmation. They can lawyer up all they want. Truth's already out." Frenchie was tracking the social media response. "People are choosing sides. Half believe, half don't. But the half that believe, they are very, very angry." "Good." Butcher closed his eyes. "Anger's useful. Anger makes people ask questions. Questions lead to investigations. Investigations lead to Congress. And Congress," he smiled, "Congress leads to someone finally doing something about Vought." "You think this will actually change anything?" Starlight's voice came through the encrypted channel. She'd been quiet since the footage dropped, watching from inside Vought Tower as the Empire started to crack. "Honestly, Probably not. Rich people stay rich. Powerful people stay powerful. Vaught'll take a hit fire, some executives rebrand, and keep selling the same lie with a new face. Then what was the point? Butcher opened his eyes, looked at the screens showing Homelander's humiliation, playing in endless loops across every news channel in the world. The point is, for one day, just one fucking day, everyone got to see the truth. Got to see their heroes run. Got to see something bigger than Vought, bigger than Soups, bigger than all the bullshit we've been sold. He stood up. And maybe, just maybe, someone out there will remember that feeling. That moment when they realized it was all a lie. And next time Vought tries to sell them a hero, they'll think twice. That's optimistic for you. Yeah, well, don't get used to it. The safe house went quiet. On the screens, the world kept arguing about what they'd seen, kept trying to explain it away, kept clinging to the comfortable lie because the truth was too big and too strange. But the footage was out there, permanent, uncensorable. And somewhere in the Pacific, unaware and unconcerned with the chaos it had left behind, an ancient guardian rested in the deep. Balance restored. At least for now. Godzilla's arrival shattered the entire power structure of the boys' universe. For the first time, the world witnessed an entity that Vought couldn't buy. The media couldn't spin, and Homelander couldn't intimidate. This set a dangerous precedent. If something existed beyond Vaught's control, then every promise of absolute protection was a lie. Politically, governments were forced to reevaluate their relationship with Vought. If Soups couldn't handle Titan-level threats, what was their strategic value? Was the defense budget poured into Compound V even worth it? These questions undermined the alliance between state and superhero corporation. For the public, the image of Homelander running became iconic. Memes, analysis pieces, even political movements used that moment to challenge power. An entire generation grew up no longer believing in heroes in capes. And most importantly, Godzilla proved that nature doesn't need humanity. It didn't save anyone, didn't negotiate, just restored balance and left. That lesson that there are things bigger than ego and marketing was something Vought never wanted the public to learn. But now they knew. And you can't unlearn that.